Good day. I'm Gordon Klein. I'd like to chat with you just a little bit today about compensating employees in the startup business. You're short of cash, but you sure want to attract the best possible talent. How are we going to get that job done? The first thought, of course, people often have is let's just give stock or an ownership interest directly to the key talent that we need to attract. When you do that, though, there's a couple problems perhaps worth thinking about. First of all, if you give somebody stock and you give it to them outright, they have a tax bill at that point. And so somebody shows up, not only are they taking a cash flow sacrifice to work for your company, but at the end of the year, since you gave them valuable stock, you must send them a W-2 for the value of that stock, and they've got to pay taxes. That's hardly a desirable situation for them. They've already gone into hock to put together the cash to survive as they work for you in the hopes of great profit down the road, and now they've got a tax bill. Plus, there's the problem, of course, if they've got a tax bill, somebody's got to determine the value of those shares, and there's often a dispute because the employer gets a write-off for them, just like the employee's got income. So the employer wants to round up, and the employee wants to perhaps round down on that amount. Much better, for a number of reasons, is to give them stock, but don't make it outright stock. Make it so-called restricted stock. By restricted stock, I mean, one, the employee has the risk of forfeiture. If they leave within a specified period of time, 3 years is a fairly common period. If they should leave within that 3-year period, they've got to turn the shares back. The beauty of that from a management standpoint, of course, is you retain that key talent. They have every incentive to stick around for 3 years. Also, though, from a tax standpoint, realization of the income is now left to the employee's choice. They can pick up the income upon getting the shares, even though they recognize there's a risk they may lose them, or, as is most common, employees will elect to pick up the income at the back end, perhaps after the passage of that 3 years and the risk of forfeiture has expired. Only at that point do we say, yep, those are your shares, those are guaranteed outright yours. Only then will the employee have the income. You can have a variant on that scheme where there's a waterfall or cascade where a segment of the shares vest or no longer run the risk of forfeiture. So if the employee says, gee, wait a minute, I got to stick around 3 years. What if I make it 2 years in a number of days? I get nothing. Well, the way you deal with that is you say something like, I'd like you to stick around 3 years, but every year, 1/3 of the shares become guaranteed yours. So according to that step schedule, at least people get meaningful ownership of their shares if they've only made it part way through that 3-year period. But on the other hand, if it's R&D oriented, you need them there for all 3 years, bring it on. You must stay all 3. You must complete the project. Otherwise, you get nothing. In addition to a risk of forfeiture, there's something else you might want to do, indeed pretty much have to do, and that is restrict the transferability of those shares. You don't want somebody to get shares and be able to go ahead and sell them next day to somebody else next door. They might be selling them to a competitor. You would certainly hate that because now a competitor is an owner. As an owner, they've got the right to attend shareholder meetings. They've got the right to inspect books and records, perhaps, and getting access to your trade secrets and mode of operation, and they are a competitor. You would never want that to take place. More broadly, in a family-run business, you don't want them to sell those shares to somebody who's just outside the family. You want to maintain control within a certain control group, either you and your tight buddy from the college dorm, or you and your family members. So frequently we give people shares subject to not only a risk of forfeiture where they got to turn them back, but also subject to a restriction on marketability and transferability. It's not enough to just give them the shares subject to the restriction on transferability, though, because what if you gave it to them and they went and sold them anyhow? Oh, sure, you could sue them, but in the meantime, some good faith independent buyer says, wait a minute, I didn't know that I was buying restricted shares. I paid good money for them. I want my ownership. If you got a fight with the original employee who sold it to me, that's between the company and that now departed employee who's probably disappeared to some remote part of the Cayman Islands, if not more distant, and can't be found. And so if you give them shares subject to a restriction on marketability, you put a legend, you put an indication right on the face of the certificate saying in so many words, whoa, neon sign, these shares are non-transferable. Consult company headquarters, the CFO for future details. That way, an independent buyer who comes along has been warned. They're on notice. So if they foolishly paid money for shares that were not transferable and they have the ability to know of that restriction on transferability, they end up with nothing. Further, I'm going to give you one more reason why you're going to impose restrictions. If your shares are in a small corporation, such as an S corporation, there are restrictions on the types and number of shareholders who can participate in what was once called the subchapter S, the more modern phrase, the S corporation. You can't have more than 100 shareholders, and you can't have corporations, partnerships, or certain types of trust funds as owners in an S corporation. As a result, if you gave shares to an employee and either inadvertently or deliberately they want to mess with you and cost you your S corp status, what could they do? Well, without a restriction on transferability, they could sell their shares to 101 people. Poof, there goes your status. Or they could sell their shares or form, either way, a new little corporation or a new little partnership or a new little trust fund. Donate them or contribute them or sell them to that disapproved entity, corporate partner or trust fund, and as a consequence, poof, there goes your S corp status. You never want to give an employee that ability to, in a certain sense, extort from you certain considerations down the road. Best thing to do is up front, make the shares non-transferable, non-marketable, liquid. That works wonderfully from a tax standpoint, and more importantly, it works wonderfully to maintain control within the original group, preserving, as desired, your S corp status.